let's say it's in environmental protests, and I'm saying, let's stop climate change. And next to me is, 20 other people saying, yeah, we should stop climate change. And then 3 or 4 people in the back are throwing rocks through people's windows. Why am I allowed to be tarnished with the same brush as those people who are actually breaking the law just because they're standing near me?
Yeah, that's actually a complicated one. We think of constitutional rights are individual rights. In fact, the Constitution's pretty resistant to respecting group rights. And yet that's clearly a context in which we are permitting an intrusion on one individual's rights in order to solve a problem that's created by another individual. I mean, this also comes up in the use of force context. So if the police use tear gas against a crowd because of a couple of people's activities, well, everyone in that crowd is being subject to a police use of force. We might want to think differently about regulating uses of force or dispersal orders that interfere with many people's rights. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't think very carefully about those distinctions.
So is it a question of practicality that the commanding officer is making a decision on necessity? And, when there's certain scale, individual treatment is just not a luxury that they can deal with?
Well, every state has either a riot law or a dispersal law or an unlawful assembly law, sometimes all of the above, that permits police to decide that a crowd has reached a certain level of violence or disruption, and then make orders to disperse the crowd. And at that point, so long as they provide notice to the people in the crowd and an opportunity for people to comply with the order, then they conduct arrests to enforce the unlawful assembly order, for example. That ends the protest. That is a full stop to the exercise of First Amendment rights. But it's something that police use frequently to break up crowds.
2 of the requirements, and I don't know, correct me if there are more, but one is a clear notice. And does everyone have to have been able to hear that notice? And then the ample time to exit, what does that mean in terms of minutes? Is it 5 minutes or is it 15 minutes?
This is a problematic area. And again, there are no hard lines, and the courts are sort of permissive here. But what we're talking about is, there's the triggering conditions before the officers are permitted to issue an order, because the order itself is a restriction on free speech. And then there's what are the conditions that have to exist before the police can enforce that order. And I mentioned 2, which is there has to be notice. And that usually does not mean actual notice. It doesn't mean that every person in the crowd heard the order, but it also means that if a police officer just says to his friend, "Hey, you think it's time?" and then goes, "Hey guys, get out of here," he can't then arrest 1,000 people who wouldn't have had the opportunity, any possibility of hearing that order. So, courts struggle with what actually constitutes sufficient notice to the crowd. But if you get arrested because you can't quite get out of there, because, for example, other people are refusing to leave, then have you received fair notice and an opportunity to depart, or no?
It seems a very clear no.
In deciding whether those arrests are lawful, right? You might and remember, there are different questions here. There's did you commit a crime by violating the unlawful order? But then there's a separate question of, did the police conduct an illegal arrest when they arrested you for doing so? So you might have a defense, which is to say, I had no way out of there. But does that also mean that the police officer should be civilly liable, or the department should be civilly liable for conducting that arrest?
And practically speaking, does that entitle you to anything?
Not never. And in this summer's events and in the protests after Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, you did see courts get concerned enough to issue some preliminary injunctions requiring police departments that were facing repeated protests to be more careful about notice and the opportunity to depart following a dispersal order. But that's still an area where courts courts are not extremely restrictive. As in many areas, waiting to let these things get sorted out in court is often an ineffectual strategy. I mean, we really need more front end rules for how we want police to handle these things, because at the back end, after they've done it, courts are really reluctant to sort of second guess police who are making hard decisions in the moment. But police, if told you cannot conduct arrests under the following circumstances, largely won't do so.